Call to order. Michelle, take roll, please.
Member Burke?
Here.
Member Fig? Member Nast?
Here.
Alternate Member
Try to get it
Sharkey?
down a little bit. Present.
Ex officio Member Nordahl? Vice Chair Schnott? Here.
Might be
Chair
one of
Spiegel?
these mics, too. He's got it too hot.
So here, she called your name.
I didn't hear it.
She did, so, yeah.
What's that, about 500 hertz?
Okay, if
350, 500?
our
somewhere?
agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Consent items? Does
Move
any-
to approve.
Second.
All those approve?
Aye.
All those
Aye.
dissent? Okay, our business items, going awfully fast. Our Brackish water reclamation demonstration. Don?
Good afternoon, Board. There was just a misstep here, and unfortunately, the correct staff report did not get included in here. It was, this is for September. We also included October, and but for the month of September, we averaged 3.4 million gallons of water a day, which is approximately 10.4 acre feet. Part of the time, we were running membrane, and then we had to shut it down because of the higher silt density index, because United Water was pumping the lower wells.
Yes.
The same was true in October, and in October, for most of the month of October, we were not able to run the membranes because United was doing some maintenance on some of their wells, and they shut down the upper wells and had to draw more from the lower wells, which increased the silt density index over 3, the threshold, which kept us from running our membranes. We were on bypass mode, which meant we were we were not running it through the membrane and mixing both the Cayugas and United Water together. But our average has been pretty close to 3.4 million gallons per day for both the periods of September and October. And if you extrapolate that out for the whole year, that would put us at just over 3,700 acre feet. So we're still within our allowable take from United and Cayugas. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions? I had noticed, I noticed from my dishwasher when we're getting more from United, and I was wondering, we don't get any notification, do we? I mean, or do we, and I'm not getting it?
We will notify the Beach District that we're in bypass mode. Now,
Okay.
I don't know what they're...
Yeah, so President Spiegel, to answer your question, the plant can go down for any number of days. Sometimes these are a 24-hour stint. Sometimes it's a prolonged week-long stint. But right now we have no mechanism unless there is a major main failure that's going to create a big slug, is what we refer to it, which is going to send a lot of debris through the distribution system. Those are the only times we will make a really concerted effort to go out and alert residents, because the water will have a murky look to it for a temporary amount of time.
Yes.
But when the plant goes down and we're in membrane bypass mode, as Mr. Villafana mentioned, you know, to go out and, you know, raise the alarms and sound the bells every time that happens, it would create some fatigue, if you will, among residents. We may go, over the course of a 3-week-long period, we may go offline, online, offline, online several times. So it just depends on the severity of the circumstance when we choose to alert residents.
Thank you.
And if I could add to that, is that, you know, if we have an incident, for example, a fire hydrant is hit, or we have a break somewhere in the line, we put out a brown water notice, and we would be in contact immediately with the beach district to notify them. And of course, if in the worst case, we had to issue a boil water notice, all that would be, made the public aware right away as soon as possible. And as Akbar was saying, we would reserve, notification to the residents only in really critical items, in critical conditions, which would be, a boil water or a brown water incident or something like that. And we do that when there is an issue.
Thank you. Okay, going to B. Akbar? Yes, thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? And
Okay, so then we're on.
oh, I'm sorry, I did.
That's okay.
Should I begin?
Yes.
Okay, thank you,
Please.
President Spiegel. Members of the board, I'm here today to give you an update on what's happening with the Groundwater Management Agency. Last time I spoke to this group, we were kind of in a holding pattern over the summertime, waiting for ag to kind of figure their stuff out. And the municipal industrial users, referred to as M&I, we were kind of sitting on the sidelines, just awaiting what the GMA was eventually going to propose. I'll just say this briefly. The past 2 weeks has been a whirlwind, and I'm going to try and capture some of that whirlwind for you. Mr. Butler, Mr. Villafana, myself, I've been keeping the group updated on kind of the finer tweaks to the ordinance that we've been reviewing from time to time. And I want to share with you today kind of what some of those tweaks are. So as a little bit of background, Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, they're developing a new allocation ordinance to govern who gets groundwater in this Oxnard-Pleasant Valley Basin. PHWA has been actively part of that conversation for the past 2 years. And in fact, we had a pretty significant hand in developing a white paper, which the M&I group developed and submitted back to the GMA staff in May of this year. And Fox Canyon recently, they released not only one draft ordinance, but 2 drafts ordinance in this very month. So in fact, we should be expecting one tonight, if not tomorrow morning. So there's a couple issues. There's several issues that we identified, but I'm going to focus on 2. And for the 2 board members that sit on the Beach District Board, you've seen this presentation just last week, but this would be a good refresher if nothing else. So 2 main issues I'm going to talk about. One is the allocation holder of record, and that means who does this groundwater allocation belong to? And I don't want to confuse this term with water rights, which is a separate issue, but by all intents and purposes, we are most concerned with who is the allocation holder of record according to Fox Canyon GMA. Second issue is the base period that is used to carve up the M&I portion of the basin. And I'm going to go into more detail on both of these. So first, let me address the first item, the allocation holder of record. So if you remember the story goes, we had all these wells out here on the coast, and then one by one, for the betterment of the basin, we moved them out to the El Rio area for it to be pumped inland to prevent seawater intrusion. We did a favor for the entire basin by giving up our coastal wells and pumping it in an area that was more responsibly pumped. Now, over time, United has been pumping for us over the past 20 some odd years, and the understanding, not only understanding, but in a written form via the OH pipeline agreement, it says, United Water Conservation District is holding the allocation for PHWA members in trust. That term, that phrase, holding in trust, is mentioned throughout the OH pipeline agreement several times. And that's to mean that United Water Conservation District is essentially exercising the allocation that belongs to the City of Port Hueneme, the Navy base, and Channel Islands Beach CSD. However, I know it's small on the screen there, but the highlighted portion, I'm going to read it out loud. This is a portion from the existing ordinance, or from the draft ordinance, I should say, that the GMA is proposing. And it reads, an extraction allocation established under this ordinance is assigned to an extraction facility. And let me explain why that is problematic. No members of PHWA, minus the couple wells we have here and there, have any major extraction facilities anymore. We gave those up. We surrendered those a long time ago, and we said, United, you go pump those on our behalf. So if you're reading this and you are taking it at face value for the words on the screen there, you would assume that, well, the extraction allocation belongs, according to this ordinance, to whoever owns that extraction facility. And in our case, that would be United. So that's clearly problematic for anyone that's under the PHWA umbrella. I mean, here we are, we did the right thing by giving up and surrendering our coastal wells. We let United pump on our behalf, and now we have an ordinance that comes out and says that allocation now belongs to United. That's clearly something that we're going to be battling and not letting it just kind of fall by the wayside and get passed via this ordinance very lightly. So we're keeping a close eye on this very topic. And to that end, we actually tried to address this in our white paper. In May of this year, in that white paper, we proposed language that we wanted the GMA to include in an eventual ordinance, and this is what we wanted them to include. It says, it is proposed that groundwater allocations be assigned to M&I retail water service providers, not wholesale water service providers, such that each M&I retail water service provider is the allocation holder of record. That would be everything we would have wanted to include in an ordinance. It makes it very clear who, in fact, owns that allocation. It does not belong to the extraction facility. It belongs to the end retail water agency, which is where it started. I'm going to go to issue number 2 here, and that's the base period used. So what is a base period? It's essentially a range of years that each M&I pumper's groundwater usage is compared to the other groundwater pumpers, and from that you determine the percentage that each agency is apportioned. So depending on the range of years that's used, it can affect the amount of groundwater that you end up with. So if you select a range of years where you're pumping very heavily, that'd be advantageous to you in the future, right? Because you were showing high numbers, and then when you do the math, you end up with a higher allocation going forward. If you use a time period where you happen to have kind of a dip in your water usage, that's less advantageous, right? You end up with a lower allocation in the future. So there's 2 base periods that have been kind of floated around over the past couple of years. Really, the T period has been the long-standing preference of the M&I group. The T period stands for Temporary Extraction Allocation. This is an acronym that I'm sure this board is very familiar with over the past 10 years, or I should say 5-6 years. That's from 2003 to 2012. So to determine our T allocations, what the GMA did is looked at, okay, from 03 to 2012, what's the total amount of water pumped? How much of that water was pumped by PHWA? Going forward, PHWA, you get that amount of water. The other base period that's been recently floated is 2005 to 2014. And this has been termed pre-Sigma. So I want to keep these 2 base periods in mind, and we're going to compare what that means to PHWA.
So can I ask a question?
Please.
Because the letter here that we have says the T period is 2002 to 2013.
And to correct the record, yes, that's a great observation. This is the correct
That's the
year.
correct
Yeah.
one?
So
Okay.
if you would, please, you can mark up that was a typo on my part, and I think I drafted this the same night the fires were getting started. I was about 10 p.m. at my office, so I apologize for that.
It's all right.
Waiting for traffic to die down. But the correct time period is 2003 to 2012. So for the last 18 months, the GMA has said, you know what, M&I, you have your pool. Ag, you have your pool. I don't care how you guys carve up your portion of the pie, be it a poker game, what have you. I don't care. You guys figure it out amongst yourself. Ag, you get 60% of the basin. M&I, you get 40% of the basin. So M&I has long agreed that we would use the T period allocation to carve up our 40% of the basin. And in fact, we memorialized that decision in the white paper that I keep referring to, and highlighted in yellow there. It kind of summarizes our position. These 2 allocations will be separately allocated to individual stakeholders within each of these 2 groups. M&I is using the T period for internal allocation. M&I has no preference regarding Ag's internal allocation method. What we're saying effectively is we want to use T, ag, whatever you want to use, we don't care. It's your business. Moving forward, we provided language, and we talked about this a minute ago. We provided even further language to the GMA staff today. We even met with GMA staff around 10 a.m. this morning to discuss a couple of these key issues. This is the language you provided them today to solve the OH pipeline issues in the extraction allocation holder of record. And what it says is extraction allocation assigned to the OH users shall be held in trust by United for the benefit of the OH pipeline contractors, consistent with the terms of the OH pipeline agreement. Now, just because we provided them that language today with hopes of them including it in the ordinance that's going to be published tomorrow, that does not necessarily mean it will be included. Time will tell, and in 24 hours I'll have a much better idea if they actually included this language. So that's to be seen. Yes?
It looks like it may be initially a semantics problem. But, we're pretty far along relative to other areas in California for our grants of groundwater management sustainability plan. So I'm sure there are other, but there are other areas out there that have probably gone through this. Where has anybody else experienced a similar problem with definition of allocation and rights, and whether it's wholesale or retail or united?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the two things I'll say to that, first off, we are kind of at the forefront of the SGMA process because the Oxnard-Pleasant Valley Basin was one, if not the only critically overdrafted basin in Southern California. So we can't look to our neighbors north and south to see, okay, how have you handled this similar circumstance? The only other folks that are kind of in our same boat in terms of progress is areas in the San Joaquin Valley. I don't know if they have this similar issue, and without having experience in that region, I couldn't tell you, but the vast majority of the users in the San Joaquin Valley that are affected, they are the recipient of the water, and they're also the owner of the extraction facility. So they don't have the same issue that we as PHWA members have, which is we are the recipient, but we are not the extraction facility owner. And Director Nass, without really going into a great deal of research, I couldn't tell you definitively.
It's not going to come down to litigation.
Yeah.
The old waters for drinking, fighting over.
Yeah. The Mark Twain tweet, I think. Yeah. Yeah. It may end up proving true. We shall see. So I want to get back to this T versus pre-SGMA comparison because this is truly important. On the left side there are the different agencies that are part of the M&I team, and that first column to the right of that is the share of our pie broken up amongst those different agencies. And you can see PHWA, under the T period allocation, we represent 15% of the M&I pool. So to get more granular, we own 15% of M&I's 40% of the entire basin. Does that make sense? So when you go from T to pre-SGMA, we lose that 1.2%. We go from 15% down to 13.8%. You may not think, well, shoot, that's only 1.2%, not a huge deal, we can live with this. What does that mean in terms of actual, let me go back, in actual acre feet?
Just before we leave that chart, Camarosa has a small allocation because they have their own wells, or why are they only 2.4% of the M&I pool?
So Camarosa's, most of their water is actually coming from a different basin. So while they are involved in the Oxnard-Pleasant Valley Basin, while they are a much larger agency of 54 square miles, they got other sources.
And they built a reclamation plant and all that.
Yeah.
A little further down, I want to talk about Ventura too, but not right now.
Okay. So as you can see, even that shift of 1.2%, going from T to pre-SGMA, we lose over the course of 20 years 7,600 acre feet. And what that means on a per year basis, we're losing about 430 acre feet per year. And put that in perspective, that's over 10% of our annual water portfolio. That is about 90% of the beach district's needs altogether. If this were to be adopted as is currently written, we would take a 10% haircut overnight. That's not something we can live with. You can directly translate that to rate increases tomorrow. Meanwhile, you look at some of these other folks on the screen. I mean, Ventura comes up with a 10,000 acre-foot windfall. You start to ask yourself, well, just by shifting the allocation period forward 3 years changes the results of that drastically. What happened in that time period? You know, one can point to the housing crisis disproportionately impacting coastal communities, say, more than other communities. I think that's one explanation. Second explanation is perhaps the declination of the harbor. Now it's going through kind of a renaissance, hopefully, but during the mid-2000s, it really took a turn for the worse and probably started before then. And then with the Navy projects, I've spoken with Amanda Fagan, and she's pointed to some projects being ramped down during that time period, but we may see more kind of coming back to the Navy bases. So a variety of factors may have contributed to why our usage as an agency was lower when you moved from that 03 to 2012 and shift that to 05 to 2014. Any questions on this graph? And Director Sharkey, did you want to address any other ones?
Well, I don't know if we want to get into that now, but I want to go back through history and talk about Ventura. And we had the pumping allocations from GMA, and we in this agency transferred our pumping allocations to get onto the state water system. Oxnard decided to burn theirs up. But Ventura was never part of that program, were they?
No, in fact, they do have a state water allocation, but they are not currently annexed into Met, I believe. However, I think they're going through that process. They're doing a project right now.
Are they getting water from United, or is it just part of the city, or I'm not sure.
You're talking about the new water supply project?
Yeah, I know they were, you know, if we're looking at the T period here, then, you know, they were mostly on Casitas, weren't they?
They were, and you're trying to, if the question is, why do they have 13% if they were not taking any state water?
That's what I'm trying to get to, and I don't know if we can get to a policy or an information thing here, but as we're going to the SGMA process, the entire, the old pumping credit system, it's been extinguished, hasn't it?
Credits are going to be a thing of the past, yes.
Right, so how do, you know, I'm looking at Ventura, which was barely part of the original, of the GMA system, and we have this great discrepancy, and, you know, how did we get here, and well, how does that get fixed?
So based on, if this were to be adopted as it's written, yes, Ventura would see a windfall. Now, it's not just a matter of us ramping down our usage for a variety of factors that we talked about. It's also a factor of Ventura ramping up their usage. And so you got to think about, well, what happened in Ventura during this time period too? And a lot of their development along the eastern corridor 126 area that used to be formerly farmland became houses. And maybe that's an explanation of kind of a double whammy, if you will. We're going down, meanwhile they're going up. So when you compare the relative pumping, they're of course going to show a lot more usage than we are. And as far as why they're 13%, even though they weren't taking state water, keep in mind we're really only talking about groundwater pumping. If you're using state water, that's irrelevant here in this discussion.
It's just that, you know, when we're looking at this particular basin, and you know, I'm going back to the old system that we had, and all of a sudden Ventura pops up, and I'm saying to myself, well, where you been, guys? You know, you're kind of late to the game.
Yes, perhaps so. Nonetheless,
I don't think there's an answer there.
Yeah, maybe that's completely rhetorical.
I'm just, you know, it disturbs me on a number of levels, and because for the reasons I stated, just historical reasons as much as anything, and if we're trying to get a true picture, admittedly we're taking a limited snapshot, and Ventura, the entire city, is not in the same system. So there's some problems with trying to equalize this allocation.
Right, and I think what the GMA's goal here is to reduce impacts as much as possible. But if they continue along this road or this direction that they have identified here, it's going to have huge impacts for us. I mean, just as a cursory math here, for some agencies, there's hardly any impact. Look at Oxnard, 663 acre feet over 20 years. You're looking at roughly 30 acre feet a year. That's a drop in the bucket of the overall water portfolio. For Oxnard, you know, they're rather ambivalent about this between T and sigma. However, you know, Ventura has a lot to gain by going the pre-sigma route. We have a lot to lose. So I'm going to go into.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, I don't want to take too much time with this, but I mean, Oxnard was burning credits and pumping, and they're being rewarded for that. It looks like here, for high water use during that period when some of us were not, and we're being punished. Is that anything close to accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair characterization. However, there's one thing I think that'll give us some solace, and that is in the calculation of these numbers you see up on the screen, that the GMA won't factor in any acre feet where you went into penalty for. So if your allocation was, say, 1,000 acre feet during the pre-sigma period and you were pumping 1,200 that whole time, it won't give you that extra 200 as as counting towards your mathematical equation going forward, if you will. So if you're incurring penalties, that won't be factored into your future allocation.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay. So we had a meeting this past Thursday. And M&I team identified 4 points that we wanted to try and drive home with the GMA staff. First one was stay with the 60-40 split. Been long established. We were, for probably the better part of 24 to 36 months, developing that 60-40 split. Number two, require ag to pay back any water that was pumped in the absence of Santa Clara River water. What this means is United has identified 15,000 acre feet of surface water coming off the Santa Clara River that will be diverted to ag, untreated, just raw surface water. In the event that, let's say, surface water deliveries were only 10,000 acre feet when they promised 15, ag would then have the opportunity to pump 5,000, the delta, from the ground to make up for that lack of surface water. The ordinance as it's written today has no mechanism for ag actually paying back the 5,000 they took out of the ground. What M&I is saying is, well, no, that's not really fair. You're just giving them more water, you're gifting them water, and it's undermining the very point we made in point one, which is stay with the 60-40 split. So to get around that, there needs to be some sort of true-up mechanism, which is if surface water deliveries don't meet what's promised, and you pump out of the ground, you got to pump less the next year to get back to neutral, which we thought was only fair. Number three, allow borrowing on future allocations for both ag and M&I. The GMA had spoken about, well, ag needs some more flexibility, allow them to borrow. We said if you're going to provide them that courtesy, allow us to do that as well. And I'll get to all these points on the next slide. And then number four, allow M&I to carve up our pool based on the T allocation. Where this conversation is heading is that the GMA has said we're not going to do pools anymore. And I'm going to go back to all four of these points in a minute to explain what that means. So starting with number one, stay with the 60-40 split. GMA said they're going to stay with the 60-40 split. In fact, if you do the pre-sigma math from 05 to 2014, put M&I on one side, ag on the other, it ends up at almost exactly 60-40. And the way they came into this time period, this 05 to 2014, they didn't identify the time period first and it ended up being 60-40. It was quite the reverse. They said, we want to have a 60-40 split. Let's try and find a time period that will create a 60-40 split. That's how they ended up with 2005 to 2014. One could also argue that that 10-year period represents a full hydrological cycle. So it makes sense in that respect as well. Number two, require ag to pay back any water that was pumped. GMA staff has acknowledged that the language is currently absent in the draft ordinance, and they have indicated to us, we'll see if this is true, that they will include that in the next draft ordinance, that there will be a true-up mechanism for ag. Number three, allow borrowing for both ag and M&I. If you're going to allow for ag, they said, you know what, we're not going to have borrowing for anybody. And I think M&I was satisfied by that response. We were only asking for that courtesy because it was being extended to ag. If that's not going to be a privilege for them, I think we're fine with not having it for us. And this is probably the most important point, number four, allow M&I to carve up our pool based on the T allocation. And what the GMA staff has said is, we're going to do away with pools. We're not going to put 60% over here for ag and 40% over here for M&I. We're just going to create one big pool. So we're going to take 2005 to 2014, and whatever PHWA's total pumping is, or total usage is, for that 10-year period compared to El Rio School District or to Pleasant Valley County Water District or the City of Oxnard, we're all going to be in one big pool together, which means we cannot develop our own methodology for carving up our portion of the pie. We are all going to be subject to the same methodology for carving up that portion of the pie, which is the 05 to 2014 time period. And that's not great news for us, as we've kind of talked about during the course of this presentation. The reason they didn't want to carve up the two portions of the pie and let each group develop their own methodology was because they felt by carving up M&I's portion first, it would create a prescriptive water right for M&I, and they were trying to steer clear of setting water rights for any party during the GSP process. Now, it's not the end of the road for PHWA in terms of trying to get back the water that's rightfully ours. They made it very clear that if we are adversely impacted, which we certainly are, that we would have a basis for a variance. And that variance we could request on day one, and they would have the right, or we would have the right to be reissued our allocation that we've lost. Of course, there's a process there. I don't know the entirety of the process, but it's essentially there to ameliorate any significant impacts to any party. And the GMA staff and the board has said that throughout this process, they are not out there to injure any single party in particular. And if there are drastic impacts to your water portfolio, they want to try and create a solution for those. And let me see if I have any additional points here. Where do we go from here? So there's a GMA meeting tomorrow at 1:30. The M&I team is meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss a coordinated approach. If there's any common themes we want to speak on tomorrow at the GMA meeting, we're going to meet beforehand to discuss that. Still lingering out there is that OH pipeline allocation holder of record discussion, and that's something that is going to continue onward. It existed well before the GSP process, and it's probably going to continue well after the GSP process. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, one more. The word variance makes me nervous. That's a discretionary act. That doesn't mean it couldn't work out in our favor, but you think we would be better off trying to lock in somewhere in the foundational ordinance our allocation, or should we try to pursue the variance tactic?
Well, I would want to lean on an attorney before giving you a good answer, but I'll say this. Variances, we're used to seeing them in the context of land use, right? If you're zoned for a type of use and you want to, serve a different type of use, you have to apply for a variance. So, and it's done on a kind of a case-by-case basis, and it's kind of a really long and fraught process. I don't want to confuse And so that's kind of the reputation the word variance has in that context. But in this context, it may be something else entirely. And this is the way that it was described to me by the GMA staff. And that is, under Emergency Ordinance E, they have 24 different variances. 24 agencies or different parties have filed variances and have been granted variances under the current extraction allocation program that we're on right now. PHWA happens to be one of them. And so it has served our needs under Emergency Ordinance E. And if any member of the public or any member of the board didn't already know that, it's as if there was no variance. You know, we've seemed to gotten used to using this variance tool as a way to kind of make each agency whole without disproportionately impacting them from the previous arrangement. I'm hoping that our experience with the variance on this go-round is very similar to our prior experience when Emergency Ordinance E was getting off the ground. So, you know, my estimation is that it could end up making us whole. And yeah, if you're trying to pick a direction here, I think we shouldn't kind of dismiss the variance approach as being unfruitful. I think it's already proven to PHWA to be a good route already, at least under Emergency Ordinance E.
Yeah, that may not be a hill to die on. We were looking for predictability, of course, but we also need some flexibility as well. And but what we don't need is caprice, you know, or somebody changes their mind, or you know, somebody has more clout than we do, and then
Sure.
we're not as firm a footing as we should be. So. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation.
Yeah.
And well, we still don't know what's going to happen, do we?
We'll know more in a couple of days. And Director Sharkey, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, if you're trying to focus your energy somewhere, you can attack this one in two ways. You can fight like hell and say, you know what, bring back the two-pool approach, and you can really try and hammer that home all day long, and you're likely not to get anywhere. Or you can do what they're suggesting and go for the variance and try to see if you're successful that way. And then in your back pocket, you always have litigation. So if the variance approach is not successful, that's not the end of the road for us. There's certainly a backup alternative, albeit a less desirable one.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, receive and file. Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay, okay. At this point, board member reports and comments. Start at that end, Mr. Beard. No. Did you want to say something, Dave?
Yeah, I just report that I've been a great pleasure to be a part of the board. I've taken another position at Naval Base Ventura County that takes me out of this particular position. And the most likely candidate that would replace me is Nathan Jacobson. He's the environmental compliance manager at the same position of the previous holder of this position, Alicia Thompson. We'll work through the appointment and so forth on that. The last thing I would say in the discussion tonight is that Triton's hangar has been constructed and is flying. We have a second hangar on the books, plus the Coast Guard. The growth is occurring at Point Mugu. I think it's somewhat stable at Port Hueneme, but could also see growth. So from a water perspective, the base is absolutely interested in having the ability to increase water supply.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Robert, I really appreciate you serving on this board. You opened our eyes to many things that you folks are doing that are really, forward-thinking effects in terms of all kinds of resources, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
You're looking at me, no.
Yeah, I got you. That's why I was looking at Bob. Mr. Nast?
Your turn.
I just wanted to say, I'm just glad Akbar is in there on our behalf, because there's a lot of moving parts to this thing,
That's right.
and we're running out of groundwater. One of the things you just said sort of piqued my interest, that we might want to decide to play the national defense trump card, and that would be one of the best negotiating tools I've ever heard of. So.
Thank you. Mr. Sharkey?
Yeah, thank you. It looks like I'll have one more meeting here.
Sorry.
And I just, yeah, I echo Mayor Schnapp's comments. I mean, Mr. Nardell's been an outstanding member of this board. I mean, you brought a great deal to it, and you've not just been an observer, you've been a participant. And then, you've been very, very, very valuable here. You got big shoes to fill. And we look forward to that, but you don't have me to kick around, so I'll be gone. When we're talking about national efforts here, some of you who know me know that for the last year or so, at least, if not longer, I've been advocating that cities and the county and everybody get together and build a reclamation facility. The wastewater plant we have is falling down, and we're grateful to Jackie Irwin for getting us some state money to get it repaired, but that's just a fix. We need a going forward solution, and the only source of new water we're going to get is through reclamation. So I've been beating that drum, and I've been pushing on that. It's pushing on a rope sometimes, because Oxnard has problems, we have problems, but hopefully we've got new management in place, new council members in place, and some strong folks that can take that forward. And with that, I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. No? Okay. Yes. Sir.
Sure, thank you. Just as a follow-up to Director Sharkey's comments about having one more meeting, I wanted to bring everyone up to speed on our calendar, at least on the city side, as far as council transition. We had council election November 6th, and the result of that is that we will have 3 brand new city council members. So what we're going to do transition-wise is Monday, December 3rd, will be regular city council meeting. That will be focused on saying farewell to our existing council members who are leaving. They will actually be back, though, for a brief period at the beginning of the next regular meeting, which is Monday, December 17th. So our plan at this point would be to have a PHWA meeting on 17th, 4 o'clock as usual. Then during the council meeting that same evening, we will do the swearing in of new council members and the official transition of current council members transitioning off, 3 new council members being sworn in. We will have a new mayor and mayor pro tem selected that night as well, and that new mayor will be working with the new council on assignments, including who will be the 3 city members of PHWA. And that may not all get sorted out until January. So it's conceivable that, well, I would say we probably will have our assignments by, the new assignments by the time of the January PHWA meeting. And there's a strong likelihood, in light of the fact that we have 3 new council members, there'll be at least 1 new member of the PHWA board from the city, but that will all get sorted out when the new mayor does his assignments and in accordance with the rest of the council. So I'd say plan to be here for at least a brief meeting on Monday the 17th, and we will keep Akbar posted on who our new city representatives will be once that is determined.
Will our meeting on the 17th be at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock?
4 o'clock for PHWA.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, historically the City Council we reorganize with the new council in December and make the committee assignments the first meeting in January. That's what we've usually done. So, but that should be in plenty of time for the next water agency meeting.
Our assistant director?
No comment, thanks.
Nothing? not a, on, do we have a new director, pardon me, a new lawyer or a, someone who's just taking Mr. Green's
Yeah,
place?
sorry, I should have
Yeah, no, that's
introduced him
okay.
right at the beginning. This is Mr. Kevin Spalding. He is
Spalding.
our, do we use the term assistant or deputy? Deputy city attorney, so he works for the same firm that Charlie Green
Okay.
is a partner at. And Kevin, this is actually the first night where he will be here in the flesh representing Charlie, pinch hitting for Charlie for this meeting and for our council meeting at 6:30.
Very good, thank you. So at that point, new business to be agendized for next, no, yes, dear.
Could I make a comment on that for new
Sure.
business? Mr. City Manager, if we have any further report about the backfill for the water agency, if you can report that in December?
Is that for the Steve Hickox?
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid being Debbie Downer and reporting to the board the latest on that, but I'll go ahead and mention it. I was very positive at the last meeting because we were down to, I think, 2 finalists at that point. Both appeared to be qualified individuals. We ended up then choosing one of those 2, and it was a gentleman who had all, in fact, beyond the certifications that are required. And we were down to basically background check and making an offer to that individual, and he made a decision based on some personal reasons that we don't fully know. I think he may have been spooked by the cost of housing here in Ventura County because he was coming from another part of Southern California that I wouldn't say is cheap, but is less expensive than Ventura County. We don't know for sure what all the reasons were, but he made a decision to pull out of the process and not accept the offer. So in the meantime, Mike Oakley, who is the retired City of Ventura employee who has been filling in about 27 hours a week as a retired annuitant under CalPERS, we can extend him through the end of January 2019. People like Mr. Oakley in the old days could work in these interim roles as long as they wanted to. CalPERS, this actually goes back to the pension reform legislation back in 2012. Now these retired annuitants are limited to 960 hours per fiscal year. So Mr. Oakley's 960 hours will run out right around the end of January. It looks like what's going to happen at this point is we'll need to have another interim person after Mr. Oakley, and we have some decent leads on who that might be. In the meantime, Avery & Associates, which is the professional recruiting firm that we worked with on that first recruitment, they have a clause in their contract where if something like this happens, where we get down to the final step of a process, we make an offer, and the individual candidate pulls out or refuses the offer, they will at no additional charge do another recruitment. The only that's nice, and that's what we're doing. In fact, if you go on the Avery Associates website right now, it's already posted for another recruitment period. I think it's closing December 21st. The downside, of course, is that that's another 60 to 90 days to get through that process, and that's why we're going to have to locate another interim. And in the meantime, we're trying to keep, we're giving Don some therapy every week. He goes, he goes to a therapist to deal with his stress level because he's doing a lot of extra work. But Mr. Oakley has also been very helpful in terms of keeping things going in this challenging time. So that's the latest on that. We're hopeful again that we'll get, last time we had not a large number of applicants, but we had a core of 6 or 7 or 8 that were well qualified. And we're just hoping this next go round to have enough qualified candidates to make an offer and get someone in here on a long-term basis.
Okay,
All
very
right,
good.
thank you.
Okay. There doesn't seem to be anybody for open forum. So at this point, 4:49. Good night.
Pardon?